Harry, as your dad has already said to you, you've impressed us all this morning, not only with your fine reading of the Torah portion, but also with your Dvar Torah. The beginning of the book of Leviticus is not easy. How does one relate to things we no longer do in our Jewish lives? The sacrifices of living creatures, the priesthood, all those technical terms you had to learn for guilt offerings. You helped us to understand that concepts of sin and forgiveness are as relevant today as they were in biblical times. I know you had a wonderful teacher in student Rabbi Matt Turchin, but you put in the work. You approached your learning with great maturity, seriousness, and dedication. And I think all of us here can see that is so much in evidence. This Shabbat is known as Shabbat Zachor, the Sabbath of remembrance. And it takes its name from an additional Torah reading, which we didn't give you to read today, but is read in some synagogues on the Sabbath before the festival of Purim, which falls this coming week. The second reading comes from Deuteronomy chapter 25. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt, how undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and he cut down all the stragglers in your rear. And then, as you can see on the screen, the Israelites are charged to remember what Amalek, king of the Amalekites, did to them when they left Egypt, and to blot out his memory, but paradoxically also not to forget, lo tishkach. These few verses are a reference to an incident that occurred soon after the Israelite slaves had entered the desert. Amalek and his army attacked the refugees from behind and cut off all their stragglers, women, children. That image of civilians, specifically women and children, on the march out of besieged cities is one that resonates painfully for us today, as over 2 million refugees make for the borders of Ukraine and its surrounding countries. The injustice of a gratuitous attack against defenseless refugees was regarded by the Israelites as a piece of unfinished business. Why does the Torah want to remember this act of aggression against its people? The full story of the battle is told in the book of Exodus, chapter 17. The Israelites have left Egypt and crossed the Sea of Reeds. Immediately they face a food crisis, which results in the provision of manna, the food provided by God on a daily basis. Then follows a water crisis, resolved when God tells Moses to strike the rock, which will pour forth water. And then there is this military crisis. Amalek, the king of the Amalekites, comes and fights with Israel at Rephidim, and Moses instructs Joshua to select troops to go out and do battle. What makes the conflict particularly tragic is that Amalek is a grandson of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, and the Amalekites are therefore, in one sense, brothers and sisters to Israel. A battle ensues with Joshua leading the troops, while Moses, together with Aaron and Hur, another of Israel's leaders, go up to the top of a hill. Whenever Moses holds up his hand, Israel prevails. but whenever he lets down his hand, Amalek prevails. Moses' hands grow heavy, so that Aaron and Hur have to support his hands on both sides, and thus he remains until the sun sets, and until Amalek is defeated by Joshua and his troops. The account of this battle ends with God's instruction to Moses to inscribe the battle in a document as a reminder that not only will Amalek be erased, but his very memory. In spite of this, the very opposite occurs. The Amalekites remain Israel's arch-enemies throughout Tanakh. They make an appearance in the book of Samuel, where Saul does battle with them. And Amalek's descendant, Haman the Agagite, pops up in the book of Esther, persuading the Persian king to sign an edict to do away with all the Jews in his kingdom. So what is the purpose of remembering Amalek? Why not consign this dreadful past to forgetfulness? Why continually evoke memories of the unhappy events in Israel's history? Judith Plasko, in her commentary to this Sidra in Deuteronomy, points out the repeated references to the remembrance of things past, the enmity and lack of hospitality shown towards the Israelite refugees as they trudged through the desert, the remembrance of what God did to Miriam by afflicting her with leprosy when she spoke against Moses' wife, the injunction to remember you were a slave in Egypt and that the Eternal One, your God, redeemed you from there. So we are repeatedly enjoined to remember events, says Plasko, in ways that affect ongoing behavior and practice. Clearly, the major events of the Jewish past are not simply history, but living, active memory that continues to shape Jewish identity in the present. Through telling the story of our past, we learn who we are and what we must become. But memory here is complex and contradictory, for different memories give rise to different injunctions, and these are often in conflict with each other. The memory of enslavement in Egypt is repeatedly connected to imperatives that insist on justice and compassion. You shall not subvert the rights of the stranger or the fatherless. You shall not take a widow's garment in pawn. When you reap the harvest in your field and overlook a sheaf in the field, do not turn back to get it. It shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Because Jews once knew hunger and experienced what it was like to dwell as strangers on the margins of society, we are commanded to create a society in which the marginal are cared for and the hungry provided with food. But other memories recall the deeds of Israel's enemies, the Ammonites and Moabites, the Amalekites, and these become the foundation of opposite injunctions, those, says Plaskow, that concern exclusion and vengeance. In Judaism, the obligation to remember brings with it an obligation to act ethically, to refine our own morality, to give charitably, to undertake deeds of loving kindness, to be generous and hospitable to the stranger in our midst. But the Torah at the same time is also reminding us to exclude those peoples who were traditionally the enemies of the Israelites. In our own age, we have to be careful not to increase the cycle of violence and vengeance as we remember these ancient enemies of Israel. when we gather together on Wednesday evening to celebrate the festival of Purim by reading the Megillah, the story of Esther, perhaps we need to moderate the ways in which we drown out the name of Haman with our shouts and gregors. Because if we forget ourselves and become riotous, there is a danger that we will respond to vengeance with yet more vengeance, or injustice with yet more injustice. Memory is vital to our identity, but it is also unreliable. Memory should serve to create societies of justice and compassion and refine our own behaviors so that we are trained to learn kindness and generosity. Memories that increase the need for revenge or that evoke hatred and prejudice should be marginalized and remembered only for the dangers they present. Perhaps that is why the Torah says, "Blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, but do not forget." Harry, happy things. I have had the pleasure, together with Matt and Rabbi Igor, of partly accompanying you on this journey as you prepared to become bar mitzvah. And I want to congratulate you on the way in which you led the service last night and have read from the Torah this morning. I like the way in which you said that the best part of your preparation was being able to read Hebrew, and that there wasn't one part of the process that you didn't enjoy. That is a great credit to your teacher and also to you. In addition to knowing you as a member of the lively class Chet, I learned a little bit more about you on Thursday, that you are decent at maths, that you enjoy science and like creative writing. You are also part of the Regent's Park Royals rugby team and enjoy swimming. You might think these are pretty normal things for a teenager to be involved in, but Harry also has some very unusual passions. Your love of living creatures is not so unusual, but Harry has 2 tanks of tropical fish, and a 3rd will be added as a bar mitzvah gift. We're not talking about a little tank here, but a 100-liter tank, and a fish owner who doesn't know how many fish he has. So perhaps having fish is not that uncommon, but I've never met anyone before who owns an ant colony, living in a special ant house in their bedroom. I should think that the possibility of a great escape by these ants is every parent's nightmare. Harry is also a great baker of cookies, and you've promised, I'm holding you to it, to bring in some to our class next week. Harry, you've given us a lot to celebrate today in times that are overshadowed by a terrible war. And we all look forward to sharing with you the next part of your spiritual and intellectual Jewish journey. May it bring you continual enjoyment, but also direct you to be the best possible person you can be. Kein yehi ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.